When I first met Brooker, who introduced me to AlphaGraphics, I was like, why am I looking at AlphaGraphics? Print is dead. Of course, here we are 18 years later and people are still saying print is dead. I bought it in 2008, kind of like what you had said, the worst possible time. It was literally 2 days before the market fell in October of 2008. You have the tools you need to be successful, right? That's what the franchisor provides you, but you need to execute upon those tools. And if you're not there and you're not executing, you will not have a successful business. Doesn't matter what the model says.
Welcome to the Franchise Champion Show. I'm Alan Regala, former G1 athlete, Stanford engineer, and franchise owner who built a multi-million-dollar exit. I created this show to help driven individuals like you find the right franchise and build a business that gives you wealth and your time back. My guest today bought an existing AlphaGraphics franchise at one of the worst possible moments in modern economic history, and not only survived, but has spent the last 18 years growing it into something he's genuinely proud of. He's going to share how he found the right opportunity, why the franchise network has been one of his greatest assets, and what he's learned about building a business that fits your life. Dan Sher, welcome to the Franchise Champion Show.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm very excited to speak with you. You are a veteran out there, had this business for a while, but take us back to before AlphaGraphics. What were you doing and what started making you think about owning a business?
Yeah, so before I owned AlphaGraphics, I actually lived in Boston. I now live in Chicago. And I was a director of a high-tech PR agency in the early 2000s when that was a great time. It was kind of, you had .com going strong, and then you kind of had that .com burst after that. And I had kids, a kid after that, and decided to move back to Chicago, which is where I'm from, and also to kind of get rid of agency life at the time. That was much more of a 24/7, 365 kind of atmosphere at the time. That was before the days of work-life balance that people see now. And, so I moved back and I still wanted to do things with my marketing background. I have both my undergraduate and graduate degrees in public communication, but I wanted to be my own business owner as well. So, that was important to me. So I started to look around to see what else was out there.
Okay. And so, you mentioned on our call before that you had some history, or in your family anyways, with entrepreneurship. How did that show up in your life growing up, and how that, alter your kind of your mindset about working in the world versus business ownership?
Yeah. So, my parents were entrepreneurs and had owned several different businesses throughout the years. So, everything from having a dry cleaner to having gift shops and hotels. And I always worked for them, growing up. It was nice, to spend time with them in their business. And, so I saw both the benefits and how hard it was, to be your own business owner. But that was really, I think, the seed that made me, realize that I wanted to own my own business as well one day.
Yeah, that's great. Not everybody has that, those role models, I guess, growing up and then seeing that in real life. So that's wonderful that you had that. When you started looking, seriously at opportunities, what was it that you were looking for? And was there anything that, you definitely wanted? It had to have, these characteristics, or something that you didn't want?
Yeah, so I think, there were a couple things. Like I said, I come from the agency world. So part of that is I didn't want something that was 7 days a week. I didn't want something that was, 100 hours a week kind of thing. And like I said, I was also working during the .com bubble. And so I also didn't want something that was super high receivables. I had seen us got burned, for six-figure, retainers and stuff like that. That is not really what, if it was my business, I would feel comfortable doing.
Yeah.
So those were part of what I was looking at is, what could I do that met all those criteria? That was more of a Monday through Friday job. That was, if you're your own business owner, it's never going to be a 9 to 5 kind of job. Even if the posted hours are that, it's not going to be that for you. So you realize that, but, having that flexibility, I think, as a business owner, having young kids where it was great. I could run over to the school, in the middle of the day, to see something at school or have a meeting with a teacher.
Yeah. And how many kids did you have, and how old were they?
Just one.
Just one. Okay. And how old was he at the time?
So when I started AlphaGraphics, he was 6 years old.
6 years old. Okay. All right. Well, that's, I think, I know a lot of people would love to have the opportunity to spend more time with their kids and be able to go to all the functions and do all those sorts of things. So that's great. So tell us about how you found this specific business and this location.
Yeah. So I bought it in 2008, kind of like what you had said, the worst possible time. It was literally 2 days before the market fell in October of 2008. But I spent 2008 really looking for businesses. And at the time, I was working with different business brokers, not always franchise based, but I knew I wanted something existing because I wanted some existing revenue already there. And so people had actually said, in the 2000s when the economy was good, you had a lot of situations. AlphaGraphics had been franchising, it had been around since 1970 and had been franchising. So there were several franchises out there where people had been franchise owners for quite some time. The one that I bought actually started in 1990. And so it had already been around for 18 years. And that was a business owner that was in his 60s already. And then it's a question of, okay, I need to upgrade our equipment because we are, equipment intensive. And is that something that I want to sign, a 5-year lease on a new piece of equipment and potentially give a personal guarantee or, something like that? Or am I happy with where I am and is it time to retire? And so there was a situation, Chicago's a good market and has a lot of AlphaGraphics, and there were several for sale I had looked at. Funny enough, it was the one that I ended up buying, which was in the town next to where I lived, was not the one I necessarily looked at first. And purposely, the last thing you want to do is buy a business because of proximity.
Yeah.
That's not exactly, the best strategy in the world. And so
Right.
so that wasn't really the one I looked at first. And I looked around and it's funny because actually the one there that I did buy wasn't even really for sale when I first started looking. But while I had been looking and deciding that AlphaGraphics was really the business that I wanted, the person who had it before me, he had two sons, one of which had been married and was found out that they were pregnant, and they lived in Alaska. And then the other had gotten engaged and was getting married, and they lived in Los Angeles. And so he had realized that being in Chicago and owning his business, and he just didn't want to be away from his business that long, but was going to have grandchildren and obviously was going to then have more grandchildren. And so maybe that was the right time for him to retire. And so that is what he ended up doing. And like I said, I had looked at some of the other AlphaGraphics and realized, that was actually the best deal for me, not just because it happened to have been, 8 minutes from my house. And so we put a deal together. And like I said, we closed in October of 2008. And yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's great. Well, it's nice that it happened to work out location wise to be so close in proximity. That's very convenient, but that was smart of you to look elsewhere. So, really interesting with you looked at a number of them and you said there was a number of them for sale. For a lot of folks, they might look at that as, okay, is there something wrong here? Because there's so many of them for sale. Like, what's happening here? Like, what gave you the confidence in this specific business and maybe even that location that like you felt like, okay, no, it's a solid business and it has room for growth? Like, how did you get that feeling?
Well, it's funny too, because I think that part of it is, myself included, when I first met the broker who introduced me to AlphaGraphics, I was like, why am I looking at AlphaGraphics? Print is dead. Of course, here we are 18 years later and people are still saying print is dead. So I'm not sure that they were right then and they're not right now. But, to your point, I think that part of it is doing your due diligence, right? So really looking at every opportunity that's out there. And I know before I actually signed with AlphaGraphics, I talked to every single AlphaGraphics owner in the Chicagoland area. So I wanted to know every other one in my market. I wanted to know what they were doing, and everybody was great. I think validation is an important part of what you do. And the nice thing about a franchise is you can validate a lot where, if you're buying a business that isn't a franchise, you can't always do those types of validations. even if you call other people in other industries or other places, they may not be as open to it, so I did do those validation. I think that's what made me feel confident in my decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Validation calls are huge. Like that makes a lot of sense. And that's great that you were able to have that reassurance and, have the confidence to keep moving forward. So, let's go back to this real quick. Like the print is dead part, you're telling, your friends, family about what you're doing, and you get that reaction. Like, what was your response to that?
What sold me on AlphaGraphics, and like I said, given my background and really wanting to use my background, was what AlphaGraphics was selling, almost 18 years ago, was that we help businesses with their marketing communications, and we help businesses of all sizes, and that is what I loved. Being in an agency environment, we could come up with fantastic ideas, but then you would have to go find somebody else who could execute on it. And, so what I love today is I help these businesses, but I have all the equipment to be able to execute for them. And we become that one-stop shop for them so that they have that trusted partner. And that is what we are. And that's where I find the most success in what we do, is being trusted partners with these companies.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so Dan, tell me about the timing of when you actually closed the deal. You mentioned this was in October of, what year was this?
2008.
2008? Yeah. How did that go after you closed the deal?
Well, I think that there were a couple of things that I think were kind of in my favor, some of which you just kind of get lucky, some dumb luck. It was funny. I did it through an SBA loan, and, I gave it to my lawyer, and, you typically can't make a lot of changes to the terms and conditions on an SBA loan. But my lawyer had actually gotten one change done through the SBA, which was that they couldn't call the loan unless I defaulted on the loan. And they approved it at the time. It was just one of the things he had asked for. They said yes. And that was great, because a lot of loans, if you remember in 2008, especially these new businesses, got called. And so as long as I paid my, payment on time,
Yeah.
they couldn't call the loan, and obviously and didn't, and that
Yeah.
has been paid off.
Wow,
So
that's great.
so that was lucky from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Part of the modeling when you buy a new business is, you always want growth, but truthfully, some customers are always going to leave, right? And there are customers that are always going to want an excuse to leave, and change is a reason, right? So a lot of times when you're doing your modeling, you look at that. And so, when we said, okay, the first year, we were estimating in my model, 10 to 15% drop off in customers, not necessarily revenue, but number of customers. And so I kind of, and when I do, run my business, I try to be as conservative as possible. I'd much rather be conservative in my numbers and be happy with the results, than predict, 25% year over year growth for 10 years. And so that first year, we actually were flat, after 12 months. And so, so I was actually really happy with those results, given the market and where the economy was and what we were doing.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's actually kind of crazy. So you were flat for a year, but this was like you started like 2 days before the market crashed. So rewind here for a little bit. You buy your business, you sign the papers, loans approved and all that, and then, then the market crashes. Like, what's going through your head at that time?
When you buy a business, especially an existing business, I think you equate a lot to like a fire hose, right? You can only drink so much water at a time. And I think that that's what was happening, is you had that fire hose coming and hitting you, but I could only drink so much water, right? So, otherwise you're drowning. So I think for me, I just had to come in every day and do the best job that we could, and kind of figure it all out. And so part of that was, honestly, taking advantage of other businesses that may have been failing. And that could have been like, we picked up a couple of good employees. that because other businesses were letting go of people and letting go to good people. It's hard, in those kind of situations because, I think we could talk about the second bad thing that happened, which was COVID, right? And that was the
Right.
same thing that happened, is that I think that there were businesses that for a long time tried to keep those good employees, but eventually some of those businesses had to let go of really good employees. And so it could be an opportunistic thing for us. So bad isn't always, bad. I mean, it's bad, but
I think that's great. Your outlook on this and kind of what your mindset was, which was, obviously you were taking in a lot of information. This is a brand new business. You're trying to absorb it all, and you can only, you know, take in so much. Drinking from a fire hose, you can only take in so much. And and the question is, what is it that you can control? And so these things that are happening out around you and in the market and all that that were completely outside of your control, you couldn't do anything about that. But what you could do was show up like you're supposed to every day, service your clients, and do the best you can. And when then those opportunities arise, maybe some competing print shops were going out of business, you know, being able to take advantage of that and see those as opportunities where you could maybe bring a couple good employees on, maybe some other, maybe you lost some customers, but then you gained some from those that did shut down. So what a great way to look at that. And you're so calm in all of what you're saying here. It's like, I know for a lot of people it might be freaking out, like, oh my gosh, the market just crashed, what's happening, what am I going to do? But you're just like this, calm, like, I do whatever, as much as I can, and you made it through very successfully. That's great.
yeah, no, I think that you're exactly right. And that is a lot of what we had to do at the beginning, and try to take advantage when we can and try to, maybe lower the price of some things at the beginning, which gave us opportunistic sales for new customers that hadn't tried us, but they didn't necessarily have the budget to do something, otherwise. Even on the equipment side, everyone wanted to sell equipment. And as I said, part of the reason why some of these AlphaGraphics were for sale is they needed to upgrade equipment. So, that was something that we needed to do. So I remember, and a couple years later, looking around and saying, there's no equipment left here that was, here from when I bought the business, because, we really were able to upgrade all the equipment there too.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I have to apologize because I need to take a step back and ask you a big important question, which is, what is Alpha Graphics, and what do you do? How do you support your customers? What do you do for them?
So, we are a custom manufacturer of print and marketing solutions. And so that could be everything from what you would consider traditional print, so letterhead, business cards. It can be signs, banners, trade shows, events, so booths. We do direct mail. We do really, garments like I'm wearing, if you name it and it's printed, we can do it. And so that, again, going back to what we do, that's what I love about what we do, is that we are that one-stop shop for a customer. And I've got designers in-house, so we know that we're going to keep your brand identity, and we're going to make sure that we have all the versions of your logo that we need or that you need. And all of that we can control under a single roof.
That's great. That's great. And you have obviously a physical brick and mortar location.
We do, yes. I love when customers come in and we can give them a tour, but that is, yes, we print, and we print here.
That's cool. Quick pause here. Dan bought an existing business in a tough industry at the worst possible moment. And it worked out because he did the homework up front. That's the whole game. The right franchise matched to your skills and your life changes everything. I help high-performing professionals find exactly that at no cost to you. If you're ready to have that conversation, book a call with me at athletetoowner.com/ready. Now let's get back to Dan. Okay, so this was 18 years ago that you bought the business, and it had already been open for how long?
Yeah, so it was from 1990, so almost 18 years then. So
Wow. Okay. So about 18 years, and I think you said you were
I'm about 18 years now. So
another 18 years now. So tell us how the business has changed since you bought it.
so So a couple things. I think that the technology has changed, automation has changed. I'm not going to use the term AI today because that's not where we are, but where automation has brought us has allowed us to be able to kind of do more for our clients to make sure that everything is more consistent, whether that's color and color management being more consistent, whether it's more consistent across the different platforms that we're doing. So if we're doing, a trade show and we're doing a retractable banner stand and we're doing the flyers and we're doing a banner, the color needs to be consistent across all of those. And, how does that happen in quality? So, so we look at utilizing technology a lot more today, whether it's the online ordering systems, whether it's fulfillment management, any of those types of things we can do now much better than we used to be able to. The other thing that I think, you look at is, 20 years ago, most of the things being done were being done on an offset press. And not that, offset's dead, but we've been able to replace it with other technologies, whether it's high-speed inkjet, whether it's laser, things like that, to be able to make sure that we can create a quality product at the quantities that people really want today. So, if you think about it, a lot more of what we're doing is personalized, right? We're doing a lot more smaller runs of things. We're doing, things like that, before if you wanted to do something, you'd have to do thousands of them. You don't need to do that anymore, and so from a marketing perspective, we can talk to a customer about being much more targeted in their marketing and give them a much greater ROI on what they do as well.
That's great. It's cool how, the print is dead from 18 years ago. It's, still people still say that. And what's funny is, obviously it sounds like the automation has really helped, be able to provide a better service to your clients. I tend to think about, oh yeah, I used to have, maybe 28 years ago, we used to have one of the, point and shoot camera, and then we'd go and get them printed out and stuff. And then the iPhone came out and it's like, okay, no one's printing pictures anymore. But now it's like everyone wants to print. Everyone wants pictures printed now. Like we're so, on a phone or on a device with everything that people like really crave having physical things now.
No, but you look at that and people had their Polaroid cameras before, or had their, like the Kodak disposable cameras or whatever. And that isn't necessarily what people are doing, but people are still they're taking more pictures than ever now, right? And so I think that you're exactly right. And that's where, we can do more of the, even you look at that. I had a call, today, somebody had a kid's project and they wanted to do a t-shirt of whatever the kid's art drawing was. And, 20 years ago, that wasn't something that was really easy to do. And, now again, we have, the dye sublimation technology and, everything to be able to do those, really easily.
Yeah. That's really cool. So you talked a bit about how the business has changed from a technology standpoint and kind of this, service offerings maybe, but how about your business as far as, the size of your business, the scale of your business, your team and such? How has that morphed over time?
So in the 18 years, we've probably about doubled in size from where we were, 18 years ago. And that is both employee revenue, square footage, just everything, has basically doubled in size in that period of time. And so part of that is, the size is doubled because we need the size for the technology, right? And for the equipment. So, we're doing a lot more signage now. That's about a third of our business is signage. So that takes up a lot of room when you're printing 4x8 sheets of things. And then you have another machine that can cut a 4x8 sheet of things, you need that space. And employee wise, you need the employees to be able to run, all of that equipment. So, so we still do have, like I said, designers on staff and customer service people on staff and, production people and all of the different aspects to be able to do the manufacturing, here in-house.
That's cool. Were you able to still stay in the same location and just grow, or did you have to move?
We did end up moving. Part of that was a little strategic. When this was started, AlphaGraphics was much more of a retail business. So they believed in being much more in shopping centers. And so our original business was actually in a retail shopping center. And when I bought the business, it was about 2,000 square feet. I was able to increase it to about 3,000 square feet there. But, retail environment isn't really what we do today. And that's not really what we're about. And it's silly to be paying the price for square footage in a retail environment. So as much as it was great to be at that location for well over, 20 years, we took the, going back to COVID and opportunities, right? Additional real estate during COVID was, moving may not have been particularly fun, but we were able to negotiate some really good, leases during COVID. So we did actually move during COVID to the space that we're in. So we've been there about 5 years now.
That's that's great. Again, another smart move, just looking at these opportunities, as they come up, a lot of people are going to look at that as, pulling their hair out, or, the world's on fire sort of thing, and freaking out. And you just like seeing the opportunity. It's so great to, just keep a level head and get a great spot with, get a great deal on a spot that makes a lot more sense for you.
Yeah.
So smart.
I'm not looking for a third one for any type of bad deal, to make a deal again. I think the crash in '08 and the COVID was enough. I'm good with that. I've got enough gray hair, but
Yeah.
but
You've lived through a lot. I think we can.
yeah,
I think it'd be fair to say let's just keep it nice and easy. No big disasters coming up in the next
yes,
decade or so. That would be nice.
exactly. I'm not wishing any of that.
Yeah, that's nice of you. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so how has your relationship with AlphaGraphics, the AlphaGraphics network, evolved over the years?
I think the funny thing about franchising is I talk to a lot of people who buy a franchise and then aren't involved with the network. And it's always puzzling to me because part of what you're buying and part of what you're paying for in royalties is the relationship that you have with not only the franchisor, but the other franchisees, and I learn more from other franchisees, you know, than I do from anybody else. And it can be a very lonely business being a business owner, right? Some people do it with their spouses or significant others, but otherwise there aren't a lot of people that know exactly what you're going through. And in this case, you've got every other franchisee that knows exactly what you're going through. So, for me, and it does take a while because part of it is like going to the conferences and starting to meet people. And AlphaGraphics has these focus groups that they do where they put you together. It's actually a fantastic program. I'm now in my fourth focus group that we've done. And with AlphaGraphics, they do it a little bit different where they're a couple year commitment. And then you actually go and do a different focus group if you want to do a different focus group. And the advantage of that is really you get to meet that many more business owners, right? So there are, let's at this point, 25, 50, business owners that I know their businesses intimately. I've been to their shops. I've, interviewed their employees. I really understand. So like I had a conversation today with somebody that was in a previous group of mine that is looking at moving. Like I said, I just moved 5 years ago. So, he called me up and he's like, okay, we're looking at moving. What are the things I'm missing here? What do I need to do here? What am I looking at here? Like, that kind of information, to be able to pick up the phone and know that and call those people, that's what you get out of the network. And so, it took me, honestly, it was probably almost 10 years before I started getting really involved. I mean, I'd gotten somewhat involved in it, and I believe strongly in going to our conference every year. So I've been going to the conference and we do some things there. So you meet a couple people. But after 10 years, like I'd walk into the conference and I'd know most of the people there at that point. So, for that, it's fantastic. And now, I've been on AlphaGraphics National Leadership Council for several years. I actually had chaired the National Leadership Council for a year. And so now I've got these great relationships both with the franchisor and all the people there because, I've been to Denver a number of times and, obviously see them every year at conference, as well as all of these franchisees. And so, I mean, literally there is not a day that goes by that I'm not talking to another franchisee and multiple franchisees, the other day I sent donuts to a franchisee who I'm really good friends with. It was his birthday. And so like I sent, beautiful Uber Eats. You can just, send, some voodoo donuts to and do it that way. And, because you have these relationships, but I've met his staff. I've been to his center. I've, all of that. So that's the power of the network. That's part of why you're in a franchise. And, again, if you're paying royalties, get the most out of those royalties. And that's it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I mean, that is such a big part of franchising is the community. And if you're not taking advantage of that, you're not getting your money's worth. It's just unbelievable how much value there is in learning from people that are doing exactly what you're doing, just in other areas, and being able to learn from others and then give that back to people like you just did with helping other people move because you just went through that. So yeah, I think that's fantastic to be involved, and you get from it and then you give back. It's a great model.
Somebody once told me before I joined our National Leadership Council that you're going to put into it, but you are going to get back way more than you ever put into it. And it's so true. And we talk about technology now, between, Google Chat and text message groups and, all of these Slack or what other groups you use. It's fantastic. And again, you have groups of friends that you can go together. Hey, I'm in this situation. What have you done before? Or, hey, what's your pricing look like at this? Or, I've got this situation with an employee. What would you do? Whatever it is, and those situations come up in your business, like I said, daily. So it's so important to have those relationships to be able to, confidently say, hey, what can I do? And the more, the more people like that, the more expertise you get, all of that.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you another question that is related, but it's kind of on the different side of things here, which is, some franchise businesses have, let's say exclusive territories, and so you don't have to worry about, let's say, competing because of the zip codes or whatever. And then there's other businesses where, you've got, the same business that's, close by. I mean, you still have, whatever, maybe 2 miles or whatever the distance is, the territory distances. But I'm curious to hear from you how you view the other franchisees around you. Are they competitors, or do you guys get along, and do you talk just like you would with the other people in your community, or is it different?
So I think that is a different question for different people. And I think probably based on what you've already heard of our conversation, you won't be surprised by my answer. But my answer is that we are stronger together. And so I will tell you, one of my closest friends in the AlphaGraphics network is also one of the closest territories to mine, and he has slightly different equipment than I do. And so we help each other out if we need to. It's funny, I had a piece of equipment he didn't have. I've had it for a couple of years, and it actually allowed him to build up his business in that, to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to buy that piece of equipment too now because, A, I've seen it, B, I know it works, and that. And so now he bought it. So did I lose a little bit of business? Yes. But did it help the network? Yes, too. Because I'm in a major metropolitan, we do have quite a few AlphaGraphics here, and I talk to them a lot. I mean, and sometimes there is, like you said, there awkwardness. Like in the past, there have been situations where a customer is going to bid two of us against each other. And I don't think that that's a winning situation. So like my philosophy in that is, if I know if I'm bidding, against another AlphaGraphics, I'll call the other AlphaGraphics and be like, either we both bid the same price or we're not going to bid. Like, it's not fair. It's not fair to us. And we don't want to be, running to the bottom, barrel.
Yeah.
It's just that isn't right strategically. But we really try to help each other out. When we're doing groups like the focus groups that I talked about or things like that, we do try not to put two people that are in the same market together, because not everybody is confident of that. Like, I have no problem sharing my numbers, and we do very openly. Like I said, with the ones who I'm friends with in Chicago, we all talk about it. There's a group of 3 owners. We go out for dinner, every so often. We just, talk stuff like that, and we're again very open at it. But as much as Chicago is the same market, do you really want to go 40 miles away for whatever? You don't. What tends to happen more, is Google thinks that this is the closest to AlphaGraphics because I live in that territory, but my job is in that territory. So maybe it feeds me the wrong one. So I had a situation where we did an estimate for somebody, and then they go, you know what? I didn't mean to send it to AlphaGraphics in Northbrook. I meant to send it to, this AlphaGraphics because this one's closer. I'm sorry, okay, it doesn't make sense for me to argue that, right? And again, that doesn't do anybody good. So, so we do some of that, but I will say that's not everybody's approach, and I believe in good karma.
I like it too. I like good karma too. So you had a specific vision for what you wanted your life to look like when you first bought this business. How has that held up?
I think overall it really has. I really wanted to be a single location operator. I believe in, being here for my team and being around my team. And I think that when you have multiple locations, that can be more difficult. So that wasn't something I wanted, both when I was looking for AlphaGraphics and just being AlphaGraphics. I think we've grown through, tuck-ins more than, straight acquisition, because I'd like to keep that single manufacturing facility. And I think that I don't necessarily want to be the biggest AlphaGraphics out there. I wouldn't mind being the most profitable AlphaGraphics out there. But, a lot of the bigger ones, if you look at, percentage, not dollar amount, because obviously they're bigger, they're going to have more, but their percentage of owner's discretionary or EBITDA, or however you want to measure it, can be less because they're investing more in their, in their business. A lot of times they are doing things that is a little bit more cutting edge. So it does tend to cost more when they're doing stuff like that. They probably have more employees that are straight overhead employees, when they're doing that. So that wasn't necessarily, like I said, where I want to be. I'm here to work smarter, not necessarily, harder for the same amount of money.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. So what advice do you have for, let's say someone sitting at a corporate job right now who maybe is curious about business ownership but nervous, or maybe someone who's been laid off and, would like to leave the corporate world, but, is just not quite sure. What advice do you have for someone like that?
I think, first of all, you can't be afraid to actually do the work. I do see sometimes, and I'm sure there are franchises out there where you are much more of an investor than, let's say, an owner operator. And I do think that there's a difference between, let's say, buying a job, which does sometimes happen with some franchises, versus, being more of an owner operator. But I do think that, I was at a restaurant last night that is not a franchise, but a husband and wife own it. And they're open 6 days a week, and they are there 6 days a week, and they work very hard. And it's a tough restaurant business is a tough business, but they've been very successful. And they are very successful because they are there every day, right? And I think that is what you have to remember as a business owner, whether it's a franchise or not. Like you have the tools you need to be successful, right? That's what the franchisor provides you, are those tools. But you need to execute upon those tools. And if you're not there and you're not executing, you will not have a successful business. Doesn't matter what, the model says.
Yep. You got to execute. You got to put in the work.
And it is. And I think that some people just feel like, okay, I'm going to just write my check and I've got my plan and that's it. But no, you've got to be the one doing it.
Yeah. Oh, those are great words of wisdom. You got to be able to, you've got the systems and the plan, the processes handed to you, but you have to execute and put in the work that's needed to make it happen.
Exactly.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on the show, Dan. Thank you so much for sharing these words of wisdom, and congratulations on being a franchise champion.
Thanks, Alan. I really appreciate the time.
Dan's story is a great reminder that the best franchise decisions aren't made on gut feel. They're made by doing the work, knowing your strengths, and finding the right fit for your life. He wasn't chasing a hot trend. He found an opportunity that matched his background and gave him the lifestyle he wanted. That's the framework. If you're ready to find a franchise that fits your goals, capital, and life, book an intro call with me using the link in the show notes, or head to athletetoowner.com/ready. If you're not ready yet, but enjoy this content, please make sure to like and subscribe wherever you're listening. I'm Alan Regala, helping you go from athlete to owner. See you in the next one.